Hello everyone, welcome to Painting Crafty, and today I'm going to be sewing and showing you how I created some sweet little Easter egg ornaments out of fabric with some basic sewing skills, and then adding a little bit of slow stitching on the top to add some fun little elements to make these, Painting Crafty special. I wanted to encourage you too that if you are just a basic sewer and just have some basic stitches, you too can create something really cute. Today I'm a part of a YouTube collaboration with my good friends Dawn, Monica, and Jody. You're going to find the links to their channels down inside of the description box, as well as a playlist for all of the other creators who've joined in today's I Can't Sleep spring collaboration. Well, let's get started. I can't wait to share this with you. These were the 3 characters I was going to be creating. So first up, I had to create a pattern. There's a link down in my description box if you would like to go ahead and purchase the pattern for yourself. The fabric I chose was a 2-sided quilted fabric. I cut out the egg shape, pinned it onto my fabric, and then used a friction pen and traced around the pattern. A friction pen will dissolve with heat, so this is a great little tool to add to your sewing box. The pattern line is actually where you're going to be sewing on your machine, so go ahead and pin your fabric together once you have your lines all drawn, and then go ahead and make a rough cut around your pattern. To help remind myself to keep an opening in the end to be able to add stuffing, I like to put the registration mark so I know where to backstitch and keep the opening. I decided to use a cotton batting to create the faces, the ears, and the baskets. It was just going to give my items a little bit more fuzzier quality in the end. Up next is to go ahead and sew my eggs together. This is the only pieces that I was going to be using the machine on. The rest of it has a slow stitch hand stitching process. This is when it comes in handy to have those little registration marks. You start at the registration mark at the bottom, go forward and then backstitch, and then go all the way around your piece till you come to your next registration mark and then backstitch there. I'm very much a beginner sewer, but this pattern was fairly easy to stitch around. Once you have your piece stitched around, go ahead and remove your pins, clip your extra strings, and then you're going to take your scissors and cut around your piece and leave about 1/4 inch all the way around. You want to do this before you turn your item in to the right side out. For the wings and the ears for my characters, I was going to be hand sewing them on. On the pattern, they're just shaped like a rectangle, but this is going to allow you to cut yours for the right size that you want for your little animals. For my wings, I cut the shape at an angle to create the wings. For my ears for my sheep, I just rounded the very top corner, brought it over on the other one, and then cut the exact shape on that side. And for my rabbit, I just made a regular old pointy shape of an ear. They're kind of a little wonky, but they look fine in the end. I'm okay with wonky, and they don't have to be perfect. To sew the little ears on and the wings on, I was going to use sewing thread to be able to do this. I'm just going to be using a whip stitch, under and up and over. I start on the one edge, go all the way around to the back, and then when I get to the front of where my front character of my face is, I want to make sure I also stitch that. So in the end, you have basically a rectangle shape that is sewn over your ears and your wing. That's just going to go ahead and secure it tightly so your ear doesn't flap or your wings don't flap away from your little bodies. Once the ears and wings are attached, you can begin the stuffing process. I like using the polyfill that's made for doll stuffing. It's just a really nice quality, and it really does hold the shapes very well for these characters. You can see me here using that chopstick type of stick to go ahead and smooth out the seams a little bit. I also go ahead and give them a slight little massage. This quilted fabric is a little bit thicker than normal fabric, so massaging those edges really does help those seams lay down smoother. Once you have your piece all stuffed, go ahead and turn the edges under that you're going to be stitching closed. The clip you see on the end is a small little quilting clip. It's a really handy tool to help hold your seam together while you're putting these stitches in. For this stitching process, you're going to be going back and forth on your piece, just right on the edge, catching the top of the fabric and creating a stitch like you're lacing a shoe. Once I had the bodies all sewn together, it was time to create the faces. I was going to be using my pattern for ideas for stitching patterns for those. I was going to be using some DMC thread to go ahead and create the stitching on my faces. This thread comes in 6 strands and I only needed 3, so I had to separate them. And I wanted to share this tip with you. When you need to separate embroidery floss, go ahead and divide the top how many strands you need, put it between your legs, and then pull your thread out. And for some reason, it really does help with no tangling. I learned this on YouTube from another creator, and it always works. Another tool I use often is a needle threader, especially when I have to put multiple strands of thread through the top of a needle. Learning how to tie a quilter's knot has been super helpful when doing these slow stitch processes. To tie the knot, you want to put your needle between your pointer and your thumb, wrap your thread around the needle about 2 to 3 times, and then slowly pull that thread and the needle out. And at the end, you're going to have a knot. It's a great knot to learn how to tie because you're going to be switching threads a lot when you're doing slow stitching processes. The first area I'm going to stitch on my face are the noses. I'm going to be using a satin stitch. I'm going to start from the back and then come across for how wide I want to make my nose, and then I'm going to go back and forth. When making the stitch, I want to leave a little bit of room in between my stitches so I can go back and fill them in. It's hard to sew exactly straight up and down, so by leaving the little gaps, you're going to be able to fill them in and have a nicer look in the end. Each of the noses and the beak are slightly different, so take a look at the pattern and you can see the stitch patterns I created for each animal. Both the sheep and the rabbit have a muzzle, so when you get to the bottom of your nose, you're going to take a stitch to make a straight line down. Then once you have your straight line down, you're going to come off to an angle, come up, and then go back down into the same hole where you ended your straight line. That's going to create one part of his smile. Now you're going to come across, make another line, up a little higher from where you ended, pull it out, and then go back down through the hole you ended on the other one. That's going to give him a smile look. Now we're going to create the other side by coming up through our original bottom hole, angling it off to create the bottom direction of his smile, making sure it's somewhat even with that very first one you put on. Then come up a little higher at an angle, and then come back through that original hole where you ended. And that's how you make the little smile faces for these characters. And then just simply tie it off in the back. To create the eyes for my characters, I was going to be using French knots. I have 3 strands of thread in my needle. I come from the back side, pull it up, hold my thread off to the side with my left hand, wrap it around my needle 3 times, and then go down close to where I originally came up through. It doesn't have to be the same hole, but close is where you want it to be. When creating French knots, that tension and the pulling of the thread is really important. If you pull too tight in the end, the knots become way too flat, so it's kind of a balance of having the right tension and then the right amount of pulling of the thread. It takes a little bit of practice, but it's well worth practicing. As a final detail, I went ahead and I added some eyebrows. I used 1 strand of the thread to create these little eyebrows at an angle. The bunny needs one more detail. He needs some whiskers. So to create the whiskers, I tied a knot a little ways down on my thread so I had some extra off to the side. I went ahead close to my nose, make a stitch, and where that knot is, it's going to stop and make the whiskers on the left. And then when I pull up, I'm going to be tying another knot, and I use my needle to get that knot nice and close to my face. So I tie the knot, set my needle down where I want my knot to be in the final end, and then slowly pull my thread to make sure that knot is close to the face. Go ahead and clip the threads on each side, and voila, he's got whiskers. Cute as can be. To give my characters of little rosy cheeks and inside of their ears, I took some blush and then just simply brushed it onto their cheeks and added some to the inside of their ears. This was super simple to do, and it added just the right amount of rosiness to my characters. I decided to use Aleene's clear tacky glue. I wanted it to be clear, I wanted it to be tacky, and I wanted it to have an open time enough for me to get my pieces on and be able to move them slightly if I needed to. and Aleene's clear tacky glue worked perfect for this. I was able to put it on the edges and some on the middle, and then place it on my item, and then kind of squish it down just a tiny bit, and it melded really perfectly to the shape. To add a wee bit more whimsy to these pieces, I took some small pieces of fun fur, made little tufts, and I glued it to the centers of their foreheads. I just love this little extra bit. I'm all about the whimsy, and this is a perfect little look for these characters. To give my sheep a little bit more of a curly top, I added some French knots to the top in 2 different colors of embroidery floss. On to creating the baskets for my characters. I wanted them to be colorful, have textures, and I was going to be able to create that with this colorful thread and some simple slow stitching. I had learned how to make this flower shape recently, and I wanted to use it on my baskets. It's basically a round circle, and then you create that, what I call it kind of a stick figure, where you think of it as being a head, 2 arms, and 2 legs. I was going to be making it about the size of that small button. I was also going to be using a different type of a thread. It's actually a wool embroidery floss. It's got a little bit more fluffiness into it. It's a twisted thread, so you don't have to separate it. You just use one strand of it. Because of the fabric and being 100% cotton and being more fluffy, I couldn't use a friction pin to draw a circle. So I'm going to be guessing on my shape. But I'm going to start from the back, pull my thread up, go straight up with my line first, and then come out to the right. I'm basically stitching a star. Once your line is stitched up straight, you're going to come underneath your fabric, return back to the center of where you started, and then go ahead and make your next stitch off to the right-hand side. Come underneath, right back through that same hole, and then go off to the left-hand side, making the other side of your star. And then on your final stitch, you're going to return to the center through the back, come up, and this is where we're going to start the weaving process. You're going to use the blunt end of your needle to do the weaving process. You're going to be going over and under your spokes as you're going all the way around. When you're pulling your thread, you want to pull it gently so it's not so tight. If you pull it too tight, your flower is going to be very flat in the end. So by pulling gently, you're going to have more of a fluffy flower. If you're using regular DMC floss, just use 6 strands, and that'll help make it fluffier. But this wool floss is really great for these flowers, and I would highly recommend it if you try this process. You're going to go all the way around until you no longer see any of the spokes on the outside, and actually go about 2 to 3 times more, even after your spokes are covered up, just to add a little bit more fluffiness to the end of your flower. And then once you have it all the way around stitched and you have a nice fluffy flower, just take your last stitch by going underneath and then tying it off in the back. And it really does make a pretty flower. The next stitch I was going to do is called a blanket stitch. You come from the back of your fabric, pull it all the way out to the knot, come to the back again, put your needle through the same hole you just came through, and before you pull it tight, go ahead and take your needle and stick it through the loop. Once it's through the loop, you can go ahead and pull it even to the top of your fabric. The next stitch you take, you're going to start from the front. Come down just a little ways, go ahead and pull your needle through the loop, and there you have your blanket stitch. Come from the front again, pull your needle through the loop, and pull it even to the top. Come through the front, through the loop, pull your thread even to the top, and go all the way around your piece. To fill in my baskets, I was going to be using a variety of colors of thread, but I was only going to be basically using 1 stitch. I was going to be using a running stitch, and that's basically just up and down is all it is. This simple little stitch can be used in a variety of ways. You can create X's, you can do little curved lines with it, you can even create little wonky lines, and they call them seed stitches. Slow stitching isn't about precision, it's just about creating patterns and using color in your stitching patterns. You can see how colorful these little baskets turned out by using this simple little stitch. I also used it on the elements that are going inside. The fabric I used for that was felt. I created a small little egg pattern for the chick. I put the first egg on in the middle, and then I added glue to the next one and placed it on top of that one. added the glue to the next one, but this one I kind of picked up that middle one and I placed it underneath there. And then I added the glue to the outside edges of my basket and put a little bit in the middle, and then was able to go ahead and place that right over the top of the eggs and just kind of squished it down, and the Aleene's glue really did hold down well, and it was so nice that it just kind of wrapped around the egg itself. My carrots needed some sort of green top on them, so I took some of the thread, I wrapped it around the square little lid I had, which made the perfect little small bow to put on the top. Once I had the bow made, I just glued it onto the back, but then I cut the little tops of the bow to create a little bit more of a fringed look to the top of my carrots. Since I was going to be hanging these from an Easter tree, I took a ribbon, basically tied a knot at the top, and then hand stitched it on. Well, let's take a look to see what these characters look like hanging up in my studio. I wanted to say a special thank you to Don, Jody, and Monica for hosting today's collaboration. Make sure you check out their channels inside of the description box, as well as click that playlist. I'm sure you're going to be inspired to create something fun for your spring. If you're new to my channel and you like doing art and crafts, come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Leave me a comment or a thumbs up if you enjoyed watching these characters be made. If you liked watching these be made, here's a couple more videos you might want to check out. Well, thanks for hanging out with me today, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again, and next time you'll create right along with me.